So all the way from the USA, say good day to Jennifer Marsman.
I know, the name doesn't cover.
All right, thank you for that warm welcome. My name is Jennifer Marsman, and during the next 45 minutes or so, I want to talk to you about AI for Earth and how we can use artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science to be able to solve hard problems that are facing our world today. So I'm going to start with just like 2 slides to talk about the AI for Earth grant program, and then I'm going to spend the rest of the time telling you about some amazing uses of technology and machine learning specifically for how you can use that to solve some really big challenges that our Earth is facing. So let me just start with a quick background on what is AI for Earth. So I work on the AI for Earth team at Microsoft, and AI for Earth is a grant program. So back in December of 2017, Brad Smith, who is the president of Microsoft, at a climate change conference in Paris, made a big announcement that Microsoft was publicly committing $50 million over a 5-year time frame to anyone doing machine learning or data science work in our 4 focus areas of agriculture, water, climate change, and biodiversity. So you can read on the screen behind me that obviously we're facing really big challenges in that area, being able to feed the world's growing population that's rapidly approaching 10 billion people, being able to provide clean water to everyone, and dealing almost with the issues that we're seeing around flooding and drought and such. And then climate change, obviously a very big concern that we're all following. And then biodiversity, the fact that species are going extinct at a rate thousands of times what they should be. And so, that is the grant program, and the reason I'm telling you this is because Australia, you guys, you are like this hub of biodiversity. I got to spend yesterday on Rottnest Island, and oh my goodness, the quokka, which is classified as a vulnerable species, is just this amazing little animal. And so I would actually, and then of course the Great Barrier Reef and all of this other stuff. So you guys are just so uniquely positioned to do amazing research and work to help the Earth. So if anyone knows of people who are using machine learning, data science, who would like to get in on some of this grant money, the worst thing is a big pot of money that goes unspent. So I just want to put that out there. Anyone who's doing work in the space, apply for a grant. We accept them 4 times a year. Wonderful. Okay, so that's the grant program. Now, what I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about is a couple of the grant recipients that we've already worked with who have done some amazing things using machine learning to solve these really hard problems. So I'm going to try to be really explicit about who did this work. I want to be really clear, this is not all my work. I'm not taking credit for this. Some of this is Microsoft research, some of this is some of our grant recipients outside of Microsoft, so I'll be really clear and try to call out for each of these stories who is doing what. But the first one I want to talk about is a project called Project Premonition. Anybody heard of that already? Project Premonition? A couple people? So Project Premonition is something that came out of Microsoft research. And the idea behind it is, how can we stop outbreaks of disease before they happen? So you guys remember the Zika virus incident, right? And then we've had West Nile disease, mad cow was a little further back, avian flu. So a lot of these really big infectious diseases that can create these big public scares. And so the research behind this was, what if we could get ahead of those and predict them before they come? And so the idea they came up with is, what if we leverage little data collectors that are out in the environment already collecting random blood samples? And those are mosquitoes, right? They're already taking blood samples from humans, from animals that these diseases are coming from. And if we're able to capture a mosquito that's consumed a blood meal, we can actually use our genomics pipeline to reverse engineer from the DNA of that blood and be able to tell what host animal they fed on and what diseases they carry. So that's what we're going to talk about first. All right, so this is actually an interesting stat. 75% of these infectious diseases, so mad cow, avian flu, a lot of these things that you hear about, Zika, they originate in animals. So they start in animals first and then they spread to humans. So 75%, so it's a fairly significant thing. So if we could catch those when they're still in animals before they kind of form outbreaks, that's a really good thing. And so I already kind of mentioned exactly the process, but mosquitoes are going around biting animals. If we can collect them or capture them, then we can make a difference and be able to actually grab that blood and to be able to do the awareness there. So there's really two, there we go. Okay, so the way this is actually done is two key pieces of research, and I want to talk about each of those. So one of them is in an intelligent trap. So I'll show you a picture of it in just a second, but we have a smart trap, and it can just collect, it has a little classifier, a machine learning classifier on the device, so it will only capture the insects that we care about. So we'll talk about that in just a second. It's essentially a cylinder that's about like maybe this wide around, and it's got a little hole in the center, and then you can stick a lure in the hole. And we've experimented with a couple of different types of lures. We've used light, because insects are attracted to light, CO2, because we exhale carbon dioxide, and insects are attracted right to that. We've used some scents, a variety of different things. And then there's actually, around the outside, 64 individual little cells, and each one of them have its own little trap door. And so what happens is an insect can fly in, check out the lure, and then fly away, and within 7 milliseconds, it will actually make a decision of, is this the kind of insects we want to trap? And then if it is, boom, we will close that door and catch it. And it's actually really interesting, because I didn't know prior to this work, but the type of mosquito that carries West Nile is actually different than the mosquito that carries Zika virus. So Zika virus is carried by a mosquito called the species Aedes aegypti, and then the West Nile is actually by the Culex genus. So we can actually differentiate between those two mosquitoes with like 90% accuracy. So it's very, very, very cool. So you can track just what you want. We've tested it in a variety of things, and around 90% accuracy right there. So let's dive into those two research contributions. So the first is the smart trap. And that's kind of a little look at it on the left-hand side. So you can see, in that case, we have light as a lure in the middle. You can see it kind of looks like a circular apartment building almost, where there's all the little individual windows, and each one of those has a little trap door. And then once the trap door closes, it doesn't kill the insect or anything. They're just trapped in there. And so it's in there, and we're able to capture it and be able to then use it to study what it's carrying. So very great use for specifically blood-feeding insects. The second key contribution of this work is once you have the mosquitoes, you need to be able to actually derive interesting information with them. And so that's where our metagenomics pipeline comes in. So we can utilize then that blood meal that was consumed, take that concentrated DNA, and be able to run that through a DNA sequencer, and then be able to tell what the host animal that it fed off of, as well as diseases that were carried. And so what makes this interesting, how we can get down to that level, let's just talk about data for a second. Can I just go on a data tangent on you, because this is something that I think is just so crazy. We can't manage what we can't measure, right? And what is so crazy to me about this whole thing since I started diving into this research is that, like, we don't know half of the species that are on Earth right now. Right? And so if we're trying to manage like this biodiversity and these species going extinct, like how can we measure that? You know, as engineers, isn't this driving you crazy? Like how can we measure that if we don't even have a good catalog of what exists now? Like how are we supposed to track that well? So that's something that really makes me crazy. And if you look at the numbers up here, terrestrial vertebrates, so those are land-dwelling animals with backbones. Terrestrial arthropods, those are essentially bugs. There's an estimated 10 to the 6 species, but we really don't know all of them. And then bacteria and viruses, there's an estimated 10 to the 6 to 10 to the 9th species of bacteria and viruses. And if I narrow that down to just viruses for a second, do you guys know how many named viruses actually exist right now? Viruses with names? 4,500. Isn't that insane? We only have names for 4,500 viruses. I have that estimate. So it's just, there's so much to learn. There's so much that we can do here. Okay, so here is a look. This is using an infrared camera, so it shows you the little trap in action. So if you watch that center cell right there, this right there, boom, oh, did you see that? It's on a loop, so just keep watching that center cell if you missed it. But there's insects, there's a lure in the middle, the insects are kind of hovering around, and then a guy should come to the center one. There he is, boop, and it closed. Do you see that? So that's exactly how it works, is it goes in, and then what's actually happening there under the covers is that there's a small, almost like a LED beam right there, and then as it passes through, it's basically taking time series data of, imagine it like kind of almost like a single pixel light beam kind of, and so then as it moves through, it's gathering that data, so it can sense almost like the wing beat speed is what it's measuring there. So as things go in, we can use that data, that time series data that's coming off of that little sensor to be able to tell what kind of insect it is. And then the other thing that's kind of cool about this is because they're trapped and you can use this, you can utilize the mosquito in there. That's an example of one of the mosquitoes that was actually caught using this trap in Houston, Texas, in one of our field sites when Houston had a little bit of the Zika concerns. And if you were an entomologist and if you studied bugs, you would be so excited about that because that mosquito is in like pristine condition, right? The state-of-the-art bug traps they have right now actually most of them use like suction or fans. So a lot of times by the time the bug gets through the suction of the fan, it's all like crazy looking. And so you don't have a nice good sample. And so right here, all it does is in a little group and boop, traps it so you have this nice sample to use. So very, very cool stuff here. All right. The main point I want to make on this slide is the fact that this is a really great example of using machine learning on the edge. We obviously, our mosquitoes aren't as great as your quokkas that will pose for selfies in a wonderful way. The mosquitoes are just like, they're in, they're out, they don't really care. And if you're like sending something up to the cloud and waiting for a response and all of that, or you may or may not have network connectivity, you can tell this is actually a really remote area and it's a really remote area. You can tell they do have cell phone coverage because the woman is talking on her cell phone. So they obviously have cell phone coverage, but the Wi-Fi is a little sketchy here. This is a pretty remote village, which is only actually accessible by boat when our team visited there. And so you can get a sense for, this is something that really works better when you don't have to depend on an internet. You can just stick it somewhere and then be able to utilize the machine learning right on the device. So it is, all that ML is happening right on device, and it does happen within 7 milliseconds. The other point I wanted to get is just the relative size. So you can kind of see what it looks like. Right there, it's mounted on a tripod. So you can see it there, right in the context of the village. And very, very cool stuff. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the data that we're collecting here. So I have 3 little friends that were collected right here. And I already mentioned 90% accuracy. We have about 90% accuracy at separating the West Nile mosquitoes from the Zika mosquitoes. And these particular guys, the one on the left is a tsetse fly, and they are known to carry African sleeping sickness. The middle guy is a scarab beetle, who is a bioindicator as well as an agricultural pest. And then the guy on the right is a very rare breed of mosquito that we actually found doing work with Jane Goodall's work that she does in Gombe with the chimps. This is a guy that was feeding off of chimps in there. So a lot of cool information. And if you take a look at each of these charts, so the first chart that you see, that's the time series data that's coming off of that little LED. So as they fly into and check out the lure, you can see the different charts. And you can see that each one of those looks distinct. So essentially different wing beat patterns and how they fly creates a different data signature that allows us to differentiate between these insects. And then the chart below that is actually the same data, that same kind of wing beat data, only instead of in the time domain, it's in the frequency domain. So it's just an FFT of the data above it. And then the black little dots there to show you which of the 64 cells it flew into, in case that matters. And then there's a whole bunch of other data that is listed below, which is other stuff that we collect every time an insect probes. So essentially, every time an insect flies in and flies out, even if we don't catch it, we can collect a whole bunch of data about the encounter. So we might even just choose to say, like maybe not, if it's something that's not a bloodsucker where it's not useful to catch it and consume blood, you could also just monitor the insect population in an area and see what kind of insects are present and such. And then as each probe happens, it captures things like latitude, longitude, the time, a whole bunch of weather type elements, so barometric pressure, light, wind, other things. So you can put a variety of sensors on there and have it just capture all of that data. And so that actually gives us a lot of good information about kind of the presence of what these insects, when they're most active, that sort of thing. So this is actual data that we took that was useful from the Houston studies. We actually had a whole group of these out in Houston during the Zika outbreak. And what's kind of interesting about this is charts that show for two varieties of mosquito. So the one in the turquoise is the Aedes aegypti, so that's the guy that carries Zika, and then the one in the orangish is the Culex mosquito, which is the one that carries West Nile. And so people had all kinds of questions about, like, when should we be, everyone was wearing bug spray like crazy at that point. But like, what was interesting, and the Harris County Department of Public Health actually worked really closely with us on this, and they were amazing to work with, but this actually was able to give them like the most precise, like down to the minute look at how these mosquitoes were behaving. Because I think prior to that, there had been like some general advice released about like, oh, the mosquitoes are most active at this time of day, day versus night, or the evening ones versus the morning ones. But with this data, we actually got a minute by minute, here's kind of what these behaviors look like. You can actually see some interesting things. Like if you look at this one in particular, you can see that it doesn't affect the Culex mosquito that much. So that particular one is tracking barometric pressure. And you can see absolutely no effect. Culex does not care about the barometric pressure, but there's a huge, it very much is affecting the behavior and how active and how many Aedes aegypti mosquitoes were out there. And those were the Zika carriers. And so with that data, we can actually go and public health officials could spray at the best times to make sure that they were killing the most active mosquitoes in a time when they were at the right place. All right? Okay, so that's kind of the physical trap, all the cool stuff that we can do there. However, at some point you need to get beyond kind of the physical characteristics of the mosquito and get down to the genomics level to be able to understand what exactly is happening and what animal, what diseases are actually happening here. And so, what we do is we take the mosquitoes that are caught in the traps, and you can see we have some blooded mosquitoes over there, and we essentially turn them into mosquito juice. So they're a very concentrated DNA of the mosquito. And then what we're trying to do as fast as possible is take that DNA sample, so that comes out of, and put it into a gene sequencer, and then basically we're matching it against this huge, public database of all partially sequenced life forms in the tree of life, which is crazy. And as fast as possible, we're trying to come up with an output that looks something like this. So a computed recipe of, what is this DNA profile? And it's going to be some mix of, here's like one example, of 90% Aedes aegypti, which is the mosquito. Around this one was about 5% Homo sapiens, so 5% it bit a human before it was captured. And then finally, a very small part of it was this novel rhabdovirus. Before you panic, remember, only 4,500 viruses have names. So if there's like a novel virus discovered, that's actually not that scary. It's just, that's okay. And rhabdovirus is actually just in the rabies family. So essentially it was carrying something akin to rabies. So that's what it was able to find. So basically, it's kind of a hard thing, right? It's almost like, imagine that you go out to the bar, or a pub, or a tavern, or whatever we say here, and you get a really tasty drink with your friend, right? And you're like, this is really good, because you don't know any of the fancy drink names, because you spent university in the library like a good girl, but you taste it and you're like, well, this is kind of good. That might be orange juice, and then is that vodka or rum, or I'm not really sure. But you're trying to deconstruct that as fast as you can. So essentially, that's what our sequencer is doing, is trying to, given this, what are the little ingredients that made it up? And we do that as fast as possible. And what makes it possible to do that so quickly is using an algorithm called SNAP. And this was developed in conjunction between Microsoft Research and UC Berkeley, the University of California, Berkeley. And it is a great algorithm that allows you to calculate this much faster, kind of using some minimum edit distance type things. But essentially, we are able to run this, and these numbers are even better than this, but essentially, something as complex as a genome. This is obviously a very big data problem, and so perfect for cloud, right? That's exactly the kind of thing you want to use cloud for. So you can throw that analysis up in Azure and be able to run it on like 200 compute nodes or more or less, and then we can get answers within a couple hours. And so this was really, really cool because with the cloud, we actually took a process that used to take like 30 days or something to sequence like one thing, and now we've got that down to like a matter of hours. So it's really, really exciting to see what can be done. And then some of the machine learning that's happening here, we're actually using Bayesian mixture models. And so what that does is, hopefully you guys can see this okay, but essentially there's a lot of similarities in the tree of life, all right? So imagine like a rat and a mouse. A lot of the DNA is very, very similar, and then some of it is different. And so what this does is Bayesian mixture models allow you to be able to essentially boost the signal of the correct thing by looking at probabilistically what's more likely, and then it kind of dampens the signal of the things that aren't correct. So helps you be more effective there. And you can see, how do you measure this? Would probably be your next question, right? So we have a couple of things right here. So if we do a complete synthetic test, we can achieve 99.99 accuracy. So what that means is we take some, like here's mosquito DNA, and we randomly sample from those genomes. And then we take some host animal or human or whatever and randomly sample some of that, and then randomly sample from some viruses, and mix that all together and throw it there. It can predict with 99.99% accuracy how it does. And then if we do the same thing, only for the second one, we incorporate novel viruses. So we take some viruses, some of these unnamed ones, and okay, here's something that looks a little different. How well can that do? Because it hasn't been trained on that type of data. And we still get around 97% accuracy for that one. And then finally, we do actual lab tests as well, where we feed mosquito real blood and go through the real process, knowing what that data is. And you can see the accuracy there is quite good as well. All right, so if you would like any more information about this, you can feel free to check out the Microsoft research page. That is the lead researcher, Ethan Jackson, right there. And it's microsoft.com/Premonition. This is all about Project Premonition. So that's story number one. Next, let's talk about something called farm beats. Anyone heard of farm beats? This is another Microsoft research one in the agriculture space. All right, so the idea behind farm beats is how can we help enable and feed the world's growing population? So at a meeting of the United Nations in 2009, it was actually stated that we need to double our current rate of food production if we're going to be able to keep up with the demands of kind of the growing population. So we need to do that by 2050. By 2050, we need to double our current food production rate. And so how can we do that? Like, could we use technology to enable farmers and help with more data-driven farming? And so that was the idea behind Farm Beats. And the principal researcher on this one, again, this is another Microsoft research one, and the principal researcher on this one is a gentleman named Ranveer Chandra. And so when I joined the AI for Earth team, I was really excited about this one, and I'm talking to Ranveer about it and asking a ton of questions. And but really what they're trying to enable is something called precision agriculture. And so if you're not familiar with precision agriculture, the idea behind it is, so precision agriculture is the big umbrella on top, and then within it there's a lot of things like precision irrigation, precision pesticides, precision line distribution to monitor pH levels, all those kind of things. And so what that means is instead of, let's take precision irrigation, because that's a very simple example. Instead of homogeneously watering a field with big sprinklers like you see usually done today, instead of giving every part of the field the exact same amount of water, instead, only water the amount of the field that really needs it, right? Because there may be little dips in the land and water runs down, and maybe this part is watered more than this part. So you can actually use that to be able to save and reduce and conserve the amounts of water and the transportation of the water and all of that. The other thing, the one that I like the best, like my favorite precision agriculture one is precision pesticides, you guys, because that's like a win-win-win all the way around. Because pesticides aren't great for the environment, they're not great for us who are eating the food, and it's actually not great for the farmer to be spraying a ton of pesticides everywhere because pesticides are really expensive, right? So instead, what they can do is actually just spray pesticides where the pests are going to be. And then, if you can use machine learning to predict that, great. And then you're using fewer of that, or less of that, which is a win-win-win all the way around. All right, so that's the idea of precision agriculture. So if we were to tackle something like precision irrigation, that seems fairly straightforward, right? Any people do like IoT, right? Does anybody have like a sensor sitting in their backpack right now that could probably measure water levels? I think I have a moisture one that I have played with before. And so, great, it seems like we could tackle this. We just put some sensors in the ground. We could monitor things like pH level and water and stuff like that. And so I'm getting super excited about this stuff, and I'm talking to Ranveer. And Ranveer told me that the first problem was actually that it's costing about $1,000 per sensor. And does that sound crazy to you guys? Because that sounded way crazy. I'm like, no, maybe you're not looking at the same websites I am, but have you ever heard of Adafruit.com? Like, come on, Ranveer. And of course, he was aware. And the problem is not actually the cost of the sensor itself. Sensors are really in the tens of dollars. So what could be causing that leap in money and cost by 2 magnitudes? Well, the next idea had was power, right? Maybe, these things are in farms, so is it the idea of how do we charge them, right? How do we keep those things charged? And it turns out, I was wrong about that one too. It wasn't the power. We actually use solar panels, and the solar panels cost roughly like $50 to $100 US for a solar panel. So again, we're talking like 100 now per sensor, but we're still not close to 1,000. And just kind of to tangent quite quickly, this is what our setup looks like. You can see the board where we keep does all the computation that actually gets enclosed in waterproof casing. And then there's some leads that snag out, and it's mounted kind of at the base of that pole, which has the solar panel on top that charges everything. And then you there's some leads snaking out, and you can bury the leads in the ground to like measure the temperature at different depths, or water levels and all kinds of things at different depths. And we also have a camera mounted on the side as well, so that they can get a real-time view of the farm. And it takes pictures in RGB, natural color, as well as infrared. So you get a nice kind of data-driven look at your farm as well at different places all over the farm. Okay, so we're maybe up to like $100 per sensor, right? So where is the rest of this money coming from? Turns out the problem was connectivity, all right? It was getting the data off of those sensors and into the cloud where we could aggregate it and actually do something useful with it. And so, the reason for that is, when you think about the large, if you've ever been in a very rural area, and let's say if you guys have maybe driven across Australia, how's your cell phone signal there? Do you get great coverage the whole way across? I'm guessing no. From the looks on your faces, I'm thinking, no. So same thing, a lot of rural areas, cell phone carriers aren't incented really to provide in very sparsely populated areas, and a lot of farmland tends to be a more sparsely populated area. So cell phone coverage is typically not great, so a lot of times if you do have to do this, you have to wire up a custom cellular solution, which tends to be very expensive, and so that's really where the $1,000 per sensor is coming. So cellular is one option. Another thing is Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi is a great technology, but the only problem is it doesn't stretch very far, right? Like I have my child's bus stop is literally right across the street from my house, right across the street. However, when I leave my home office and walk across the street to pick her up from the bus stop, literally I'm out of Wi-Fi range, like just across the street from my house. I can't even reach my home Wi-Fi. So Wi-Fi, you would need so many repeaters when you're talking about these acres and acres of farmland, you need so many repeaters that it's not effective. So, 2 solutions to this. Solution number 1 is, can we use fewer sensors and then be able to extrapolate that data to learn more from less, essentially. And so, essentially what we're doing is we're doing fewer sensors, and then we're coupling that with aerial imagery overhead. And primarily we use drones for that. And there's actually some really cool, I'd love to get into the drone work too, because they're doing all kinds of battery optimizations that are really neat with the drone too. Ask me about that later if you want to hear more. But there's, essentially the drones fly overhead, they take aerial imagery, and then the machine learning model takes that aerial imagery from drone footage, or in some cases where there's a lot of regulations and drones are not a feasible solution, they'll use essentially a big helium balloon and tether it to the ground with a camera, and then the camera makes a little cone and can take pictures of all of that, and you can either walk with it on a lead or just plant it somewhere if it's big enough. So we take that aerial imagery from usually drones, sometimes the balloons, and then take that from the data with the sensors that we do have. We can feed those both into a machine learning model, and then that is able to predict the information that we do have. And so those machine learning models are actually based on Gaussian processes. And it's essentially conceptually, you can think about it as using two key things. One is the spatial similarity, right? So farmland that tends to be close together tends to have similar values, usually. The other conceptual thing is visual similarity. So if I have a dark patch of land right here and a dark patch of land right here, maybe they were both freshly irrigated and have similar moisture levels. And that tends to work as well. So those allow you to construct machine learning maps to figure out the moisture levels of an entire field, even if you don't have sensors on the whole field. All right? And so putting that all together, that enables all kinds of cool things. If you have all of this data coming in off your farm, it can enable precision irrigation, where to best do fertilizer applications, predicting yields, all kinds of stuff you can do with this great kind of temporal, spatial view of the farm. Now there's one other solution I want to mention, because we talked about how do we get this data off the farm and the connectivity challenges and that sort of thing. So reducing the number of sensors we have is one solution, but I mentioned there was a second one, and we still need to get the data from the sensors we do have into the cloud, right? So what's the answer to that connectivity challenge? And so this is actually really cool. They're pioneering the use of something called television white spaces. So the idea behind this is traditional Wi-Fi operates at approximately 5 gigahertz, all right? And so that's awesome, but when you think about something like a TV broadcast, right, television broadcast, that's operating at a much lower frequency. And if you remember your science, much lower frequencies, the waveforms stretch much further, right? They're much, much longer. And so the idea is to actually turn unused television channels. So these are we call these television white spaces. So basically frequencies where things aren't being broadcast on television spectrum to create an internet, to send data packets over unused television stations. Now you can't just do this. You do have to work with the local government and make sure that this is okay. But we've actually stood up pilots of this in Kenya, and then we're looking at doing this in a couple of urban areas as well, just to enable a whole city with internet and that sort of thing. So that's the idea behind television white spaces. And so what's really cool about this is that one television white space router just can broadcast so far. So imagine if you live 16 kilometers away, you could still access your home internet from here. How cool would that be, right? So really, really neat, where one television white space router can usually service acres and acres of farmland. So a nice solution that we're pioneering, and that's worked quite well. All right, so this has happened, a bunch of pilots of these going on, and there's kind of the overall architecture that I talked about. So that is FarmBeats, also by Microsoft Research. All right, the next one I want to talk about is something called SPOT. So SPOT is this stands for systematic poacher detection. The problem we're trying to solve here is the poaching is a very, very, very real concern. And so here's an article from NPR, and if you kind of zoom in on this, the date is September 3rd, 2017, all right? So this was within the last year. So this is not something that used to happen or a long time. This is still very much a real problem today. And just to kind of talk about why this is such a problem, here's a quick look at one of these wildlife sanctuaries. These animals, when we talk about rhinos and elephants and some of these large animals that are poached, since they are such big animals, they have a very wide range of where they roam. And so when you consider the problem of, oh my goodness, we have limited resources of park rangers and so much space, how do you best predict where the poachers are going to be, where the animals are going to be, and make sure that you can get out in front of it? So poaching is a huge industry. I know people are like, how could anyone do this? It's so crazy. But when you look at kind of the economy, here's why this is happening. The average per capita income in sub-Saharan Africa is $762. And when you look at the amount of money for a single rhino horn, it's literally worth more than gold in terms of per pound. And same thing with ivory, is not more, but it's still one poached elephant will give you basically a lifetime's worth of income. So this is a very real issue, and state of the art right now of how we fight it is drones flying overhead, and the drones are sending back streaming data in real time, and then there are humans sitting at screens that have to monitor the drones and have to look and recognize, okay, here is the here's the data coming in. This is really hard for a number of reasons. Number one, it can't scale well, right? If you have more drones, if you put more drones in the air, you have to have more humans watching the screens because there's only so many screens a single person can look at. And then most poaching happens at night, so a lot of times the people that are monitoring that, they have to work overnight, and fatigue is a real thing. So the idea behind this seems like a great thing for computer vision, right? How do we use computer vision to solve that problem that will scale and computers don't get tired? So the problem is, it's just a hard problem. It's a very hard computer vision problem for a number of reasons. So number one, the footage that's coming back is infrared footage. So infrared looks something like that. So that's kind of what we're looking at here, is this gray and black and white blobs. And the first thing is the original image. Then we have thresholding right there, where it's popping things that are above a certain threshold that makes them whiter. And then we've also done some work to stabilizing for frame differences. And what that means is the drone is moving overhead, as well as sometimes the animals are moving below, but when the animals are moving, that's actually a good indicator that, hey, it's an animal. But you need to do some work, you need to do some fun math to just make sure that when one thing is moving, another thing is moving, you can calculate that all out okay. All right, but this is very, very hard because, first of all, the drones, depending on the height of the drones and where they can fly, it can get very, very, it could be like a couple pixels of where the actual animal is in there. And the motion and stabilization actually makes it tricky too when one thing is moving and a second thing is moving as well. And then just the fact that these are kind of thermal infrared images, it's hard. I mean, do you guys see it? So right there, we've added the boxes on the left. So that's the actual real poachers. Did anybody stop them from the original thing? Because I sure didn't. I don't have that expertise. So it's really hard to pick out real poachers in this situation. So it's a tough problem. But a bunch of researchers, so this is work that's being done by the University of Southern California, and their research, they're actually using Azure to be able to do some of this processing. So they basically, if they have a stable internet connection, so the data is sent in real time to a GPU laptop that they have there in the field. And then if they have good Wi-Fi connection, they'll send it up to Azure for processing and they train the models there. And then otherwise they'll just use the actual laptop to get results, because this is something that also has to be done in real time, because once the poacher shoots the animal, it's game over. You can't undo that. So it has to be done quickly as well. So that's their architecture. Here's a quick video that shows one of the field tests that they did, and you can see that when it has the little boxes around it, it's accurately recognizing the people. And so they are running, and we're almost there. All right, I'm gonna keep moving. All right, one other story is something called iNaturalist. So this is one I would love to see catch on in Australia. So iNaturalist is a group that is nonprofit, so this is another non-Microsoft story. And they basically collect data. There's a little app that allows you to take a picture of any flora or fauna, and then it takes that image, it wants you to label it, so it's a labeled data set, which is awesome, and then give me the time and the location of the observation, and then it uploads there, and then they take that data set and they make it publicly available to researchers and conservation biologists and all these people to have this great index of what the world looks like. So it's like a crowdsourced version of that. So that is iNaturalist, which is there. It's a big, thriving community. A lot of people use it. But the reason I wanted to mention to you specifically is that we've actually trained a model based on the iNaturalist data, and then I was working with some researchers at Monash University who were trying to recognize bees specifically, and I tried to use this. I looked at trying to use the one that we trained on that data, and it totally didn't work because iNaturalist is really popular in North America, so there's a huge North American bias to the data that's currently there, and you guys have some crazy bees here, man. So your bees look very different than our little tame bees. So it wasn't performing really well. So I would love to get more people, tell your friends, download it. I use this all the time on my on nature walks with my kids, and they'll be like, "Mommy, what's that? What's that tree right there?" And I'm like, "Oh, honey, it's a eucalyptus tree." Of course, there's no eucalyptus in where I live. It was the first one that came to mind because I saw one yesterday. But those little things, I don't know birds, I don't know anything, but my kids actually just grab the phone from me now, and I want to learn what this is, and they love it, because if you see a crazy squirrel, or little animals, or any plants, you can learn and actually see what they are using the classifier. So it takes this, to step back, To provide a label, one might want to submit a picture of a bird, but one might not know what kind of bird it is. So how can I provide a good label to data if I don't know what kind of bird it is? Enter machine learning. So we've trained a classifier on a bunch of data that already existed, and then use that classifier that when you actually use the app, you can click something called View Suggestions, and then it invokes the machine learning classifier, which uses the image of the picture that you took, so it's using computer vision, plus it will use data on the actual location, and feed those together to make it available. So that's what's happening right there. And then just to jump to the example, let me just make it really clear. So this is a picture I took in Stockholm. And so here's what it looks like when you put it in the app. It asks, what did you see? You actually, it will grab this right from the camera. If you take the picture right in the app, it will give you the location, the date, time. And then if you click that, what did you see view suggestions, if you don't know what it is, it invokes the species search. And you can see here, I had no idea what that bird was. I was guessing maybe a crane or maybe a heron. And it was able to tell me, yeah, we're pretty sure it's a heron. And then here's kind of the top 10 species suggestions. And if you click into each one of these, it actually shows you more detail of the gray heron and the blue heron. And so I was able to correct and say, oh, this one is nearby, and it looks exactly like that, so select. And then I was able to submit that and make that available for the world. So really quick look, we did train something with that, and you're welcome to check that out if you want. We put a little demo. We took the iNaturalist data set and created a species classification API. I think we took the 5,000 most popular animals and trained a PyTorch model on that. So you can actually go here and classify and see how it works. And in this case, here's something that looks like it can differentiate that this is a coyote, and it actually knew that as opposed to wolf and a lot of other things that look very, very similar. So happy to show that in more detail later, but I want to be cognizant of time. All right, one last story I want to show you is a group called WildMe. So what they are trying to do is solve the problem of animal tagging, right? So there was a horrible story, this was from National Geographic, where really rare whale found. People went to tag it. In the process of tagging it, ending up tragically killing the animal, which was the opposite of what they wanted to do because it was this rare, amazing animal. So what they said was, can we do better, right? You guys know that as human beings, we can uniquely identify fingerprints, right? We're uniquely identified by our fingerprints. Well, the same is true for zebras and their stripes. You guys may have heard that, right? That zebras have the unique stripe patterns. It's also true for large cats and their spot patterns, for giraffes and the marking on their necks, all of these types of things. So what they can do is actually utilize that in this database of thousands of animals and then be able to uniquely do that and uniquely identify these individual animals. The last thing I want to say that is so cool about this, so that in itself is a really cool computer vision story, right? Really, really cool. They're able to take this data and do some amazing computer vision. But what takes the story from good to great is they actually augment their data using social media. All right, so let's say I just went on, one of their things is whaleshark.org, so I uniquely can identify whale sharks. And so if I'm just a random person on a whale watching trip and I take a video and I upload that to YouTube, they actually have an intelligent agent that wakes up at 10 p.m. every night. It searches the web, it uses some NLP, can find things related to whale sharks, takes that video, extracts the keyframes, and then is able to identify and match those against its database and find even more new whale sharks. And then with that data, it can estimate population densities as well as track individual migration patterns of whales. Isn't that cool? Isn't that better than using social media for like Instagramming your food? I'm blown away. I just think it's such a cool use. So that's kind of what the process looks like, and then they can use that there. And I'm happy to show you guys a demo of that later. All right, so we've covered a lot of different things. We've seen mosquitoes, agriculture, poaching, crowdsourced species identification, as well as identifying different kinds of animals. If you want to learn any more about this, see research papers, any of that, there's a ton of great links right there. And then don't forget to tell people about the AI for Earth grant program as well if you're doing any work in machine learning, because together, hopefully, we can use machine learning and technology to make a difference. Thank you.